This is GTR, Genesis Timeline and Roots. In a world of fractured stories, timelines buried, and truths erased, one project dares to ask the question, what if everything you thought you knew about history was wrong? This is GTR, Genesis Timeline and Roots. A 5,025-year simulated walkthrough tracing a melanated Adam back to 4000 BC. Over the last decade, new revelations confirm a black origin for humanity, from European vaults to tribal memory, Babylon to Britain. This is not just history, this is a challenge, a simulation, a movement. Meet the man behind GTR, Dr. Wilton MacDonald II, Caymanian, British, Jamaican, haplogroup E and stateless for 26 years. Now a global explorer, 119 countries and counting. A hedge fund lawyer, a UK chartered accountant, a seeker of the lost archives of our people. But the question remains, if all black people came out of Africa, does that make us only African? Or are we also European, Scottish, Native American, Jacobite Hebrew, Asian? GTR exists to answer that question. You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. A splinter in your mind. That splinter has brought you here, to GTR. Whites can't trace their roots before the 1800s. Where's ours? Where are the tribes? The languages, the kings, the queens, the true Hebrews? Where did the giants go? Where are the Neanderthals? Angels, aliens. Why do we speak in so many tongues? Was Babel just a myth? A memory? History has holes. Hollywood has lied. The system was never made for us to remember. Only 5 to 8% of people today are white. And what about the 1800 stories and postcards of the cabbage babies? But nearly all history books center their story. That doesn't add up. Atlantis, lost cities, vanished civilizations, or were they erased? Try GTR. Take the red pill and awaken to the truth of your ancestors. Or take the blue pill and keep dreaming a fantasy. GTR, a simulated walkthrough of Black Hebrew history and eschatology. This is the beginning of remembering. This is GTR, Genesis Timeline and Roots. What is GTR, Genesis Timeline and Roots? is a 5,025-year existential simulated walkthrough time from a black melanated Adam in BC 4000. Over the last decade, there has been an explosive revelation of primary sources, including the Dresden-based Morse Quadrille 1706 painting and the Ben Franklin essay of 1751, confirming the black melanated timeline for humanity of approximately 5,025 years. Nevertheless, the GTR timeline represents a simulated exercise based on the aforementioned sources and Dr. McDonald's personal research over the last 5 years, taking him to 119 countries and 7 continents. To date, Dr. McDonald, second Apollo Group DNA default being African, Caymanian, British and Jamaican citizen, and the creator and founder of GTR, the Genesis Timeline Roots, project and brand. He's a hedge funds lawyer in multiple jurisdictions, UK chartered accountant with over 30 years of professional experience, working on a third doctorate focusing on the exploration of black melanated history and eschatology, meaning last day events, in the 19th or rather 9th century AD, it said. Dr. McDonald, the son of Wilton, Dr. Wilton and Sarita McDonald, both came in residence, started life as defined in today's genealogical standards as a stateless, undocumented, haplogroup E African, and not knowing his true roots for first 26 years of his life. Yes, we all came out of Africa, but being black and haplogroup E, as a man, is Dr. McDonald and any other haplogroup E's, and by extension the A's to the D's, are they just Africans linked to sub-Saharan Africa? Or are they also European, Scottish Black Hebrew, Jacobites, Native American Indians, and even Asian in origin? GTR seeks to answer this overarching question. The flash scenes to the two groups: are we sub-Saharan Africans or Scottish Jacobites?
We represent the African diaspora. I feel proud of my African heritage.
There's a royal past that is kind of missing.
That is a challenge that Africa needs to handle.
Jesus is transformed totally from being a black man to a blue-eyed, blonde, white boy.
GTR, Genesis Timeline and Roots. We see here as depicted God and Satan, the great controversy, and how we've been fighting this war for thousands of years, and God being a melanated figure, a Morpheus, sitting in the chair in the movie Matrix. What do you know? What can you explain? How do you? What do you? You felt it all your entire life. There's something wrong with the world. You don't know it. There are like a splinter in your mind driving you mad, and that's that feeling that has brought you to GTR. And you have a choice. Ultimately, one could go on taking either the blue pill or take the red pill to wake up. Many families, including white prominent families, arguing about genealogy. They can't trace their roots before the 18R. Personally, I have known many families. The other takers of the blue pill, we are questioning where our root languages come from. The Latin, the Slavic, the other languages, Germanic languages, which English forms a part of, German. Where do these languages come from? You take the red pill. You take the blue pill, you stay in slumber. What about skin color? That's affecting all of us today. Red and yellow, black and white. We have diverse colors. You take the blue pill, you stay asleep. You take the red pill, you finally realize where your true origins lie. We have cavemen, we have giants, we have the Neolithic people that of Orkney, Scotland and other places. They disappeared. The giants disappeared. Cavemen disappeared. Neanderthals, questionable, they disappeared. You take the blue pill, you will still sleep, not knowing where the Peruvians, the people of Machu Picchu, and those tiered gardens in Peru, where did they go? Did they suddenly leave? The same thing could be said about the Neolithic and the Orkney and Orcadians. Where did they go? Suddenly, they disappeared and vanished. Then we look at people who built Stonehenge in England. Where did they all go to? Where are the Vikings? Why did the Vikings suddenly leave North America and vanished? We have Tartarian Kingdom, they have the White Tartars and the Black Tartars, but we know that from the 13th century they are this shrouded mystery behind the technology. And And where did they actually go to? The famous mud floods, what were they about? When did they occur? When did these kingdoms vanish? And they spanned Asia. Little is told about the black history. We often were told about Asian history and white ancestry that goes far back, but that they cannot be confirmed. Lots of details can't be confirmed. Archaeologists, they throw up their hands and they can't explain or find missing links in the fossil record. It just doesn't add up. The timeline is off. How come there's no immediate modern evolution? Evolution is not the same thing as adaptation. We have a phylogenetic tree that is designed and presented by Dr. Jensen in his book. Traced, we know from his research that the E's are the base haplogroup, but there'll be more about the haplogroups, which is just the box they put you in when they're trying to assess your DNA, in light of the origins of man, which the scientific community has conceded that everyone, we all came from Mother Africa. GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. But how did we come? When did we come? What timeline did we come into? So the crux of the matter is, for black melanated haplogroup E's, and by extension A's to D's, are we only sub-Saharan people? Or are we Scots and Celtic, Bites? Are we also European? The GTR seeks to answer these and other questions. We have many competing theories and timelines. We have 4 paths to consider, with first and most prominent path in the textbooks would be the theory of evolution by the 1800s and 800s, Professor Charles Darwin. This is path 1, timeline 1, millions and millions of years into the past. Counting even the subhumans, created and invented the assumption that the male DNA, back to the DNA haplogroup R for renaissances, is the fully evolved white male, the prototypical male. He's the modern man, the epitome of the modern man. That is what the consensus is under timeline 1. He has dominated Western Europe, Middle East, even Africa, thousands of years. And even in ancient Egyptian times in 1300s BC, and even King Tutankhamun, or short for King Tut, shrouded in mystery. But yet, upstream and downstream from Tutankhamun, you have Ramses and many Egyptian kings. It doesn't fit. Those kings are E's. Like me, they're E's and black men, pushing these DNA haplogroup E's to literally to the back of the bus, to sub-Saharan. They, ours, insert themselves into Africa. The date of timeline 1 is somewhere around 150,000 years to 250,000 years in the past. Timeline 2, this Sitzer was B, the poster person, is Albert Perry, a man who lived in South Carolina, USA in the year 1819, roughly 200 years ago. It was just in a genetic anomaly. Centuries of DNA manipulation data dating mankind to over 338,000 years. Not clear if the eye was even looked at or analyzed, according to scientists which have looked at this, like the close of Brown and other scholars have looked at this record, and they have not concluded properly if the Y chromosome was even examined. But we have the case of Albert Perry. The third timeline is the Judeo-Christian timeline, the one that's so famous in Christendom amongst most Protestants. This is around 6,025 years, and this has a few important differences on the color of the original mankind under timeline 3 of 6,025 years. Mankind is white, including Adam, Christ. All the biblically referred persons are white. There's no reference even to Ellen White's position on the amalgamation of mankind and animal DNA producing humankind. The theories include the spurious Book of Enoch, involving white angels mating with mankind, and the curse of Ham features. And we have a timeline which doesn't account for today's proportion of whites. 5 to 8% out of 8.2 billion. Today we have a small percentage of whites, which doesn't explain this timeline properly. On the other hand, 200 million or more of blacks were killed during our Holocaust and building up the New World, not necessarily African in origin, but from the Americas and from Europe. Many souls, more than 200 million, died. And if those persons were figured into the calculator, we would be beyond 12 billion people by now. Alternate timeline? The Dark Ages is relevant. That's the period between the 600s and 14. This doesn't feature in timeline 4. This is completely dismissed, as this other nonsense, the Egyptian Exodus, would have taken place somewhere around 1300 BC versus 1500 BC. Next, in this timeline, the transatlantic slave trade featured. That's between 1500s and 1800s, but considered largely a hoax under the fourth timeline. And like any good student, we discuss the theories that are competing, and we dismiss them for sake of completeness. GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. The fourth timeline is the Judeo-Christian timeline, GTR style, 5,025 years. We have here, based on work by even Dr. Nathaniel Jensen at Harvard, that haplogroup E was the first, then branched out into A to D, and the timeline is around 5,000 years. And the reckoning of time, as for James W. Lee, the year 582 became 1582 when the Gregorian calendar was adopted, and that change has affected our timeline. So essentially we are living in the year 1025 and not 2025. As a note and as a warning, is there any reference to black mankind? It's a reference to a being with a certain level of melanation, a biochemical given by God, as we were and are created in God's image. We look at briefly the theory of evolution. We see the Big Bang, the creation of the universe, the creation of the Milky Way. We're supposed to believe that we just happen to come into this earth through chaos. The people at CERN in Switzerland have been trying to recreate this by colliding and bombarding elements, and there's no success. At least there's no evidence of a success. But we are given the account that Big Bang explosion and explosive events led to the creation of this, the universe and our solar system. Then we see a pattern that evolution went from water-based, simple, single cell to more complex cells. We notice that the evolution gives a timeline, a progression of mammals, apes, and progression to black melanated to white males being at the top of the human food chain. And so it is that it's this theory that we have been told and we have been brainwashed in textbooks to believe and accept that mankind came, and more so black mankind being the subhuman class and the intermediary class being modern day Asians, and then the modern called Europeans being at the top of the human food chain. Main problem is that about 1,000 to 2,000 years ago, during the time of Christ, we had 150 million people on the planet. The question is, how long does it take to make 150 million people? It does not take millions of years to do that. And the Cambridge PhD scientist, his name is Professor Marco Fasoli, sat down and criticized, blown apart, the evolution theory for over 150 years. They've been searching for fossil records. There's no modern day accounting for. The evolution is not the same as adaptation. As organisms, we naturally can adapt, but doesn't mean that we evolve. There's atrophy built in as it goes into the human body and the cells. Cells break down, we downgrade, we atrophy, we don't upgrade, we're not the Transformers. We do not upgrade in terms of the organisms, and that's never happened. In the flood event, in the soil and record event, as a geologist, drill down to the planet's core, there's been no evidence of the supposed missing links. They just do not exist. And we look at the case of Albert Perry, and this case has been analyzed, extended, the timeline from 220,000 years under evolution, with the modern man coming into existence to almost 338,000 years, and his DNA assignment was letter A. But from Dr. Jensen's work, we notice that the DNA haplogroup started from E. So the first man, being Adam, would be E. But a curious case of Albert Perry, not really analyzed in terms of his male patrilineal heritage. It's a curious case indeed. The fourth timeline of human history, which is 5,025 years. In this timeline, we go from events as foretold in the Bible. GTR, Genesis timeline and roots. As foretold in the Bible, when God was created, God created man. God created a black God, a melanated God, created mankind in his image after his own likeness, and we go back for 4,000 to 4000 BC roughly. During this time frame, we have presented and we will present that mankind has gone through an awesome transformation through industrial cities as built by the antediluvians and Atlanteans, and they've done that for about 16 years from creation. And during that time, they violated God's laws, they corrupted his creation, they came up with all sorts of hybrids, including possibly the dinosaurs, giants, different species of man, and God was not pleased and sent the flood in around 24 BC. And we're reduced to 8 people, including Noah and his family's 3 sons and their wives. The global population was reset. The Christian scientists estimate there could have been 1 billion people on the planet during the antediluvian world. But afterwards, at the flood event, the clock was reset. The human population clock was reset to 8. After the flood, to the age of Nimrod, the mighty hunter, we entered Babylon, where the people of the earth, black, melanated people, because Noah and his family were all black melanated people, they built the Tower of Babel. They wanted to avoid another deluge, another flood, even though God sent them the rainbow to underscore that he will not destroy the world by water. God confounded their languages. They spoke different languages and had to disperse and move away. And Babel is the reason why we speak different languages today. Shortly afterwards, you had different historical figures like Father Abraham. We had the biblical figures like Joseph and his father Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. We knew that there were many people who lived as black melanated people on the earth. But we know that they were people who served other gods, who built Egypt and the ancient Samaria, and they were black melanated people. Included giants for the Geno, they helped construct the large pyramids, and after the Egypt fell with the exodus of the Israelites as delivered by Moses and the hand of God in around 15 BC, Israel became a superpower. They created their own empire on this earth, and they were ruled kings like King David, King Solomon. These were black melanated kings. And we moved to the Babylonians in around BC 600 and ruled by black kings. The Israelites were imprisoned, we know of the stories in the Bible, and would move to the kingdoms of Persia. These are modern days in Iraq and Iran. Then followed by Greece in the 300s BC, with many scholars like Ephorus. His books are missing. He wrote us extensively about mankind, black mankind, and we had Alexander the Great and other generals who followed Greece and the ancient Spartan kingdom. To the formation of Rome in 150 BC, and Rome was a ruling kingdom when the Christ was born, a black melanated Christ. Now it's important to note that the population as recorded and confirmed by United Nations was around 150 million to maximum 190 million. And if you use the numbers, you know it went forward from there. You will see that it will be impossible for those claiming history to be in anything but melanated, given the numbers today of whites, which are 5 to 8%. We have the period that the Rome was a superpower up until 476 AD, and the Bible of course gives accounts. We know that Rome in their prophecies laid out in Daniel and Revelation, but even the historical record will confirm Rome fell and defeated by black Germanic tribes. These were advanced people in Rome, in buildings and empires that spanned the globe. They also shared technology, and these kingdoms grew in the Western Europe. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Heruli, the Lombards, the Alemanni, the Saxons and the Franks. These were all black Germanic kingdoms, and they defeated Rome. And when Rome fell, if there's any Dark Age period, it would be the period between 476 and around 490. Rome emerged from the darkness. As they have been helped throughout history, the civilization has been helped. And throughout this presentation, you will see those, I call it, demonic hands. And they would suggest periods where civilization was enhanced, from the times of the antediluvians to the building of the pyramids in Egyptian, to the Babylonian empires, and onward. Here it is that we had a major transformation. Pagan Rome fell to the hands of people who did not defeat Rome with mud sticks and slingshots. You can't do that to the powerful Roman army who they trampled and shook. They marched the ground, shook, and the record of the Romans, it's encased in rock today. And if you go to Cardiff, Wales, you'll see the accounts of black Romans, visibly negroid and melanated Roman soldiers today standing in Cardiff, Wales as part of the Royal Castle exhibit. So Rome was in a state of darkness, but they woke up around 490. And if there was ever a time that Rome decided to shine, was then. Because the Dark Ages supposedly finished around 15. It's then that mankind grew a brain, poof, light was dispersed, and all this information just leaked out, I say. And I posit that the timeline was changed indeed in the 500s, but they went back and revised certain parts of history. So Rome went with not just an Italian, but a Roman Columbus, a black Columbus to the west, for money. It would make sense because Rome fell and they went westward seeking a benefactor, sponsor, and they had the bright. Where did they get the vision from? They were there. They were inspired. Perhaps art by God. But the other guy inspired to go west, knowing of a new world. So Columbus's voyage would have been put at 492, not 1492. All of the Reformation and the Protestant movements would have taken place in the 500s. How did we go from a near an all-black planet in the 1700s, as confirmed even in the Ben Franklin essay on the increase of mankind? How do we go from there to a slightly mixed race population, and it all happened from the 1800s? There are accounts of us turned cabbage babies, and it's for you and people listening to do your own independent research, but all the proliferation of the orphanages and the asylums which happened throughout the world, the Western world, there has to be a reason. This was pre-war. They could not blame World War I and II, which occurred years, decades later, on the existence and the proliferation of these establishments to house children who appeared that they had no parents and no roots. And the modern timeline from the 9th to the end of the 9th, the 1800s, to the start of the 19th, the Victorian era, was a period of prosperity and the greatest expansion the world has seen.
GTR, Genesis Timeline and Roots.
The creation and the account of the creation, we must note that in Genesis 1, it says clearly, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. In Genesis 2 and 4, it goes on even to 6 when it says, verse 7, and God formed the man out of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Man became a living soul, and from the dust, the natural color of the earth is black.
Our model of our world was quite different. It was a planet that looked and felt different from today. Our planet before the flood was one where it was a homogeneous landmass, an interlocking landmass. James W. Lee tried to recreate what it looked like as a solid landmass with the continents forming what was termed Pangea. We look at numerous connections, and this may explain why there is evidence of life in different continents. And really, Genesis 1, when it says that God created the world, it can also mean, as biblical scholars, as a recreation of the world. So bearing that in mind, that this version of the world, it is the 5,025 years, nonetheless, God created man, and it was a physical creation from a black man's rib, God creating Eve. We note that there are many slides visions of the Garden of Eden, what it may have looked like, and there was a black Adam and Eve. And each time we see the red hands over the earth. This is a moment in time where it's influenced by Satan. So sin crept in the world. We know the biblical account of Adam and Eve both sinning, and they were forced out of the Garden of Eden. And this was following the 4000 BC creation. And with sin entering the world, the first murder was committed in Cain killing his brother Abel. And from there we know that the fallen mankind built large industrial cities. Today we refer to them as Atlantis. Whether Atlantean or antediluvian, these large cities thrived for more than 1600 years, and the flood event happened around 24 BC. But before the flood occurred, mankind was experimenting, was a founder of the Adventist Church. She spoke about the amalgamation of black mankind with animals and other cross species, the giants being created and other creatures which were savage and beasts that God did not create, and those things were wiped out by the flood event. But we know people of God thrive. We have Enoch, who walked with God for 300 years and he was taken up to heaven. We know of Methuselah, the oldest living man and the grandfather of Noah.
Noah's father, Lamech. These were all biblical black melanated men. We know of Noah, his 3 sons, and we know of their wives. Noah waited 500 years before he really settled and got married. And so he waited because of the genetic manipulation happening there. He waited for the right person to come along as provided by God. We are told in the Bible of the kind of wickedness and corruption of the earth. And in the book Genesis 6 verses 11, it says, "The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. God looked upon that earth, and he beheld it was corrupt and tainted. His whole beautiful creation was marred and scarred by the genetic manipulation, as confirmed by Ellen White, the founder of the Adventist Church." And she wrote about this in the 1800s. God sent the flood. It was a violent and cataclysmic event. We're told that the subterranean waters, they were broken up by asteroids, and this was a violent event. Meteors fallen from the sky, it broke up the channels of water. It didn't rain in those days, didn't have to, because there was water underneath and there was water above. We had a canopy cover, a cleanup of an ozone, a thick ozone that protected the planet from harmful radiation. And so the ark was created, and God preserved 8 souls aboard it. We know the people who built those cities, they must have panicked. When the water started to pour through, what terror they must have felt when that happened. And God watched over the ark as it floated upon the water, or as it said, reigned for 40 days, 40 nights. And we had a new world continent which was separated. And even today, our true map of the world is different. If you look at the Gold-Peters maps and the Peterson map, you will see that the map of the world is different. Africa is quite large, 3 to 4 times the size. Greenland pales then on the conventional map. Europe is then prominently featured as like a suburb of Africa, and our understanding of the world as told by the maps has been distorted after this flood event. The waters did recede. God sent the rainbow as a reminder that he will not destroy the earth by water. Noah and his family must have visited, and the children which came after. This served as a reminder on Ararat that it was as modern-day Turkey. It's believed that it rested. They must have gone back to the ark and remembered God's promises and remember that flood event. And after the flood, we have in our timeline, we have the mighty hunter Nimrod. We had sun worship that people focused on. They took their eyes off of God and tried to build a tower stretching into the heavens, and God confounded their languages and dispersed. But we had followers of God. We had black father Abraham and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, around BC 21. And the true Hebrews have always been black people, as told and communicated in the Bible. And we have images and other materials to support those black Israelites. We have the account of Jacob, who wrestled with angels. He was saved and he was protected. He became a father of many nations. We have many sons of Jacob. We have the account of the Israelites moving to Egypt as a famine. We had the great cities of Egypt, and an ancient Samaria built by black would be large, giants, large men. They became first superpower around 1900 BC. There thrived. Egypt reached its pinnacle with the slave labor from the black Israelites, and they all toiled until Moses, in around 1500 BC, saved God's people, rescued, and they departed. God parted the Red Sea, and they made their exit from Egypt. God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, which we still abide by today. And we mentioned that there's a prophecy of under 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. The starting point was it then, within this period, or, as some biblical scholars suggest, it happened years later. This would be the start of the 2,300-day prophecy round about the time of the exit and during the time of David and Solomon. David 1000 BC, David defeated Goliath, and we know from the records that he was a deep melanated person. As we know, we have accounts and black Russian icons disclosed in the last 3 years that these were melanated kings. King Solomon, the wisest man, had a temple, the Golden Temple, built. We've had satanic influence throughout. We had Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom around the 600s BC. We have Darius and Cyrus of Persia, 500s and 400 BC. We note there that actual walls of the palace of Darius and in Persia, it's on display in the Louvre Museum in Paris today. And on those images and walls taken from Iran, modern day Iran and Persia, those images are black people. And we move forward to Greece, and we notice that Euphorus of Greece, around 350 BC, he was a black melanated person. He wrote 30 books about mankind, and those books are lost. Alexander the Great in BC 300s and his generals, he was black. They were all melanated people. The real Spartans and Greeks were black. The Alexandria Library, destroyed, no more would have contained rich literature showing black civilizations. That library is no more. The black Romans from 150 BC, after those Punic Wars, they thrived as a civilization, as a kingdom, and note that the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found are dated round about BC 100. So we have to account for that in our timeline, and Rome was the superpower ruling during the time of our black Lord and Savior Yeshua. And we know that there's the baptism of Christ that took place in 8030, and we know his ministry lasted about 3 years up to his death in 8033. And the black God gave the command to awaken his son and that he be resurrected, which he was resurrected in 8033 and went to heaven. And the next event on our timeline, it's the lawyer and historian called Cornelius Tacitus in around 8056.
He wrote about the black civilizations. He wrote about the people of Britannia, and we know the Romans bought the black picks in the 1st century, 80s, the 90s, up to 8122, when the Hadrian's Wall was built in Scotland to wall off the savages from the rest of Britain. And we know that the Roman exhibits in Wales today shows deep melanated figures, Romans and chariots. These were not Africans that they brought from Africa. They were deeply melanated Roman figures that carved in stone. The next point in our timeline is in 8312, Emperor Constantine was converted to Christianity, and he was a black, the emperor, and the first Christian emperor. We know that the Counts of Nicaea decided on the canon around 325, and these were black scholars that assembled to determine which books were canonical or not. Rome fell as a superpower in around 476-80, and they were defeated by the Black Vandals and the Saxons and the Visigoths. Rome's true Dark Ages would have taken place between 476 and 490, and there is that through satanic intervention and influence. The rise of the papacy occurred. They went boldly with bold new ideas with the New World, and this would have happened, fast forward as you say, to 1492. I say before 92, it makes sense that a Columbus, a black Columbus, not just an Italian but a Roman, went forth to discover the New World. And we have tapestries recorded in the 1400s, but rather 400s, of black Moors, as they call them, people of Europe who lived there. And there are accounts of the wild persons of the forest, always depicted as Caucasian, that lived in the forest, but in very small numbers. We have the black native Indians, and we are told many accounts One scholar, you have Anita Wills. Others include Dane Calloway, who tell their stories of there are relatives being Black Native Americans, Aboriginal Americans, who live in America from the post-Olmec days. The Olmecs can be traced back to even 400 BC. They would have walked over and come over the barren streets into the Americas. But these are deeply melanated people. We have many sources, including the Arabic sources, that tell of the people of the planet, even the Tabikat and the Maxon, Arabic sources that tell the story of how the people, the Moors that they're called, describe their white opponents and describe their nature as crude bellies protruding and their hair being long, and that they were lacked intellectual perspicacity, reasoning, foolishness. These are all accounts which were all medieval accounts, but really would be dated between the 500s to 800s. 80, which, would be understood to be 1500s to 1800s, during the time of this period of great Catholic influence. In the papacy, we see the rise of Protestantism. We see Martin Luther as a figure emerging not 1517 but 517, and his 95 theses that he nailed on the church doors. We have the Black Tudor King, which makes sense. He clearly protested against the church, and he was standing in the snow, Henry VIII. 534, we have the accounts of Thomas Cromwell, destroyed a lot of the relics. 90% of the black icons and relics were destroyed. This is the problem we have today. This is why GTR is a simulation, because even in the time of the, you say 1500s, I say 500s, Thomas Cromwell and others destroyed the black relics, the icons of the time, the kingdoms. They were paving the way for the Church of England, and we lost a lot of our history. Martin Luther died around 546, or just rather 546. We have Pope Gregory the First and the 14th, who changed time itself. The calendar was changed from 582 to 1582, and that is referred by James W. Lee and their writers and scholars that eliminated that their dark ages were not so dark. They're fake, they're made up. We have a black king, James I, that is shown in other sources as a slightly whitewashed image, but he was a deep melanated king of England and Scotland who gave us the English Bible in 1611. Rather, it's 611. We have black colonizers. We often talk about the colonizers. Well, these colonizers were black people. We have Harvard University, established in the 1600s, but rather it was the 600s. And we have a statue of John Harvard in Harvard Square, but it's also called the Statue of Free Lies. Harvard was established in 1636 and not 1638, lie number one. Number two, it was established not by John Harvard, but by the colony of Massachusetts. And the biggest lie of all of the Free Lies is that John Harvard is not depicted in that image. They don't know. They claim not to know what John Harvard looked like. But if you don't know, then like all these defaced images around the world, including the Egyptian Sphinx with missing noses, John Harvard was black. But they're not going to admit, but he is not the person depicted in the statue of John Harvard. We have books that have come out on the history of Brazil. The world was being colonized by black people. There was one on the natural history of Brazil that was written, and this was documented by William Piso in around 648, or rather, you would say 1648, about the local black resilience. Remember, this painting was painted in Warsaw, Poland, and is depicting 4 black kings. This painting has been authenticated. It is not on public display, and it shows 4 royals whose names are in and entered into a German language on the painting itself, but it's not publicly shown. And that was called the Morse quadrille. That's the further evidence, and that's probably one of the best evidences collected so far on the black history that existed even up to the 1800s. We have here further on evidences of the memoirs of John Mackay, a civet secret serviceman in 1733, or I call it 733. In it, John Mackay in the UK has described there's more than 32 references of nobles and kings of the UK who were black, people of parliament where he described as black and melanated and swarthy. There are many of these references in the book of John Mackay. And some of these exhibits, they would show that, for example, one gentleman, the Duke of Bedford, he was a black complexion and he was robust, credulous. We have other nobles where we discussed about the Duke of Northumberland, and we have other persons discussed where they were 25 years of age, black and complexioned. Edward Montague, Earl of Sandwich, all black, black figure, black complexioned in the book that's produced in 1733. And these are only some of the sources that I've come across and research about history. There's Charles Lennox, the Duke of Richmond. He was described as a tall and a stately person of black complexion. There is another one where it was discussed he was of Spanish build mixed with a black build. Duke William, Duke of Devonshire, he was also a mild statue, well-shaped, very black complexion, a lover of music and poetry. Know that the Masons took over the world globally, and today they rule in the highest parts of government. The rise of the Masons would have happened in 1700s, or rather 700s. Ben Franklin was a Mason. Ben Franklin is not the person featured on the $100 bill. Ben Franklin was a man of a dark complexion with a large nose, and in those days they wore white wigs. But Ben Franklin had something to say on his essay on the increase of mankind, and this is dated 1751, or rather 751. Ben said, "The number of purely white people in the world is proportionably very small," and this is at paragraph 24 in his essay on the increase of mankind. He says, "All of Africa is black or tawny. Asia is chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly." So in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, the French, the Russians, the Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans and the Saxons of black, except there is a small body of people in England on the face of the earth. And he wished in his essay that the numbers of whites, he termed rosy red people, would be more abundant in numbers. And he wanted the small contingent of whites to populate places like America, and that was his wish. Perhaps Ben had father issues. Most likely he was mixed race with a black father, as most ruling men were black back in the 1700s. The black colonizers were fighting, and we had the War of Independence in 1776. A black king, George III, he was called Mad King George, against President Washington, who they claimed did not have kids. But I want to point to the source of one of the sources from George Washington, a biography, and this was written by Douglas Suffolk Freeman. And this went on to say that George Washington was a tall and stately black officer and of 38 years old. This gave a definite description of George Washington as a black man. And the other sources that describe King George III is that we have the 1792 Barbados penny. And on the pennies, which are available for purchase, are collector's items. It shows a clearly dark Negroid black melanated King George III. We move on to 50D. What was the Moroccan Treaty about? A newly created America that had off from Britain an independent nation. The first treaty of the Moroccan was an American treaty in 1786, rather 786. It was termed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Now it retained certain rights to people who would be considered sovereign and the black people who are essentially living in the Americas. It said clearly that this treaty, if you are a more Indian, Negro, Afro-American, the labels change. This treaty is still in effect, and it recognized that the Moors has sovereign people. But if millions of Moors were already living in America in the 1700s, how can you enslave or take away their sovereign rights? And that's the question. You just simply change the classification and not call them Moors, but rather call them Indians, Negroes, and finally Afro-Americans. It's a heat and wake-up call for native black Americans to obtain
their lands back. This treaty of 1786 is still standing today to give blacks in America, real Indians, real black natives, the power to reclaim lands as Moors, as they're defined in that treaty. The French Revolution. Those black melanated King Louis XVI, who lost his head, his wife Marie Antoinette, these were black melanated people, and Pope Pius VI, who was jailed around 1798, who was also melanated. That would be 1708 in our timeline. The global population back then would have been around 700 million black people in that dispensation in that year. And this was a great century of change. Emperor Napoleon, he came on the scene back then as the ruling ruler of France, 1802 to 1815, or rather 82 to 815. And he himself was whitewashed. He was described in several books. We have here a book that was written and is available on the memoirs of Napoleon Bonaparte. In that, we could see that he was described as having black skin. On page 1783, it says that Bonaparte was remarkable for the dark color of his complexion, and it's available for purchase on Amazon, which is called The Memoirs of Napoleon Bonaparte by Louis Antoinette Forvaly de Beauregard. We have another book source that was written by Denis Davidov, and that was called In the Service of the Tsar Against Napoleon, The Memoirs of Denis Davidov, 1806 to 1814. He describes Napoleon as having a rather large nose, dark eyes, dark hair, in a word, the true Italian facial type. In fact, his face was slightly swarthy with regular features. His nose was not very large, as described in that book, The Great Sphinx in Egypt. And we have many accounts to show what the Sphinx looked like before it lost its nose, and we know Count Volney of France. He gave accounts around 1787 that looking at the bloated face, puffy eyes, flat nose and thick lips of a face of a mulatto, this is how he would describe the Sphinx which lost its nose and part of its lips. The time we had different interventions taking place during this period. After the late 1700s, we moved to the 1800s. Once again, the passage in the Bible says, "So it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be before the coming of the Son of Man." Once again, the lab sign just went to work, we were told, and we were given evidence of not giants this time, not dinosaurs this time, not even other creatures or mythical, or we say seemingly mythical creatures. We have what is termed the cabbage babies. Now, this may be an uncomfortable topic for some, but there were many thousands of postcard babies you could have gotten. And these were not colored babies, but white babies. There were many lab incubators. During the 1800s, there were trains that delivered babies. You could have literally bought babies in a Sears catalog for $3. You had so many of these postcards to show babies grown in cabbages, but cabbages that were just used as a metaphor or lab instruments. People have given accounts questioning their grandparents in light of the stories of the cabbage babies in the 1800s. And note that this is before the World War I and II, so there's no reasonable explanation why they had such a high proliferation of babies. And these were white babies. They weren't different colors. They were not Indian babies. They were not black babies. They were white. My grandmother told me babies came from a cabbage patch. The weird part is that she was very old and would state it as a fact. She didn't remember her birthday at all. We just thought that she was senile. And now I wonder, I have told the story by a Polish woman I met being in the road in the UK, and these are accounts by literal people today within the last 5 years. They've given accounts. The woman's great-grandmother lived for 120 years and was born around 1870. She had no memories of any parents growing up with 17 other kids. The streets were muddy and it was mostly soldiers patrolling. And another statement stated that they would remember that their grandparents chose their names depending on their work and what they did. Their mum's maiden name was Blackman, blacksmith, and other names inherited included Archer, or barber, or bowman, potter. I believe The children must have been clones. The standard names can be traced back to England. Other people said their mothers told them they came from the Cabbage Patch. She was raised in an orphanage and her mom had no idea of the date of birth.